The empty window sill. The fragrance of baked sugar and melted butter, usually a balm, did little to soothe the hollow ache in Elara's chest. Leo's birthday. 50 years she'd marked the day by baking his peanut butter cookies, a tradition observed even in his absence. Flour sifted through her fingers with practiced grace. Each action, a ritual, a hushed conversation. Almost ready, sweetheart, she breathed, her voice a fragile thread. The kitchen, typically her haven, felt cavernous, silent without the echo of his carefree spirit. Under her touch, the dough, now a velvety sphere, waited. She formed it into small mounds, etching each with a fork's crosshatch. The steady rhythm almost lulled her, a counterpoint to the turmoil within. Images flickered, sun-gilded afternoons, bandaged boo-boos, his irrepressible smile. As the cookies browned, she busied herself with straightening, her movements brisk and purposeful. Anything to avoid confronting the empty windowsill. The timer's sharp buzz sliced through the quiet, demanding she face the inevitable. On a plate, the cookies gleamed like small, edible suns, their heat warming her hands. She walked to the windowsill, each step measured and heavy. This part always felt like traversing a tightrope. The ledge held only a whisper of pollen. She could almost see Leo there, his pockets overflowing with nature's trinkets, each rock and leaf imbued with fantastic stories only he knew. She set the plate down. The peanut butter scent intensified, a bittersweet perfume. Across the street, the park shimmered, a backdrop to happier days now permanently stained with sorrow. A memory, sudden and sharp as a shard of glass, the bright yellow slide, his joyous cries, the instant she'd looked away to answer Mrs. Henderson's rambling complaints. Just a moment. It had stolen everything. He'd been wearing that spaceship t-shirt, a vibrant blue against the green of the park. She'd seen him reach the top of the ladder, his small hands sure on the rungs. "Watch me, Elara. I'm flying to the moon," he'd yelled, his face radiant. A smile touched her lips as she turned toward Mrs. Henderson's incessant chatter. When she glanced back, he was simply gone. Gapsing in the sun-drenched scene. A guttural scream tore from her throat. She'd plunged into the throng of playing children, calling his name until it was raw. The other mothers joined the search, their initial smiles fading into a shared, unspoken dread with each passing second. Police arrived, their expressions carefully neutral, offering no solace. The swings, the slide, the sandbox, all cordoned off with yellow tape, transforming a space of joy into a stark tableau of fear. They never found a trace. Elara blinked, the present crashing around her. The cookies sat undisturbed on the sill, a silent tribute to a memory. 50 years. 50 years of birthdays, holidays, and the gaping void where he should be. 50 years of agonizing questions and relentless ambiguity. She leaned against the cold pane, her breath clouding the glass. "Happy birthday, Leo," she whispered, the words barely audible above the thrum of her own pulse. "You're not forgotten." Never. A single tear carved a path through the dusting of flour on her cheek. Hope, a frail flame tended through decades of grief, flickered but refused to be extinguished. It never would. Following footsteps. Footsteps. Elara followed them across cracked pavement, muddy trails, and linoleum floors, each print a ghostly echo of her brother, Leo. The first few years were a frantic sprint, fueled by adrenaline and the naive belief she'd find him just around the corner. She plastered his 8-year-old face, a mischievous grin framed by unruly brown hair, on every post office wall, grocery store bulletin board, and lamppost from Oak Haven to the next county. Town after town blurred into a tapestry of weary smiles and sympathetic shakes of the head. "Lost boy, you say?" "I haven't seen him, dear." The words were a constant, stinging refrain. She clutched the worn photograph, its edges softened from countless showings, and swallowed the lump that always formed in her throat. The money her parents had left dwindled. Pride, a luxury she could no longer afford, evaporated. She took on odd jobs, waitressing at greasy diners where the smell of stale coffee clung to her clothes, cleaning motel rooms with a grim determination, even picking apples in orchards until her hands were raw and stained crimson. Each dollar earned was another mile she could travel, another town she could scour. Orphanages were the hardest. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the echoing laughter of children sent a sharp pang through her. She'd steel herself, plaster on a hopeful smile, and present Leo's picture to the harried matrons. "Have you seen him? He would be older now, of course. Brown hair, probably taller. Kind eyes." Sometimes, a flicker of recognition would spark in a child's eyes. A boy with a similar cowlick, or a girl with the same curve to her smile. Her heart would leap, only to crash when the child's story didn't align, when their name wasn't Leo. Shelters offered little respite. The faces there were etched with hardship, haunted by their own losses. She'd walk through the crowded rooms, her gaze sweeping over every face, searching for a familiar spark, a hint of Leo's spirit. Often, she'd find herself drawn to a young man huddled in a corner, his eyes lost in some distant memory, and her hope would surge again, only to be dashed by reality. One rainy evening, after a particularly fruitless search of a homeless encampment beneath a highway overpass, Elara found herself sitting on a park bench, the photograph clutched tight in her hand. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and the city lights blurred through her tears. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and despair. "He's out there," she whispered to the empty park, her voice cracking. "I know he is." But the words felt hollow, a desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness. The footsteps she followed were fading, the trail growing cold. Yet, she knew, with a stubbornness that defied logic, she couldn't stop. Not until she found him. A glimmer of hope. The rain hammered against the windowpane, a relentless rhythm mirroring the ache in Elara's chest. Another dead end. Another faded photograph tucked back into its acid-free sleeve. She scrolled through the online article, the sterile blue light of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. Unlocking your past, the power of DNA testing. She almost dismissed it, another frivolous trend promising easy answers. She'd chased too many mirages already, mirages born of wishful thinking and desperate hope. But the article persisted, highlighting success stories, reunions forged across continents, lost branches grafted back onto family trees. Elara scoffed. Her case was different. Decades had passed. Traces blurred, memories faded. Besides, she'd already submitted countless inquiries to adoption agencies, scoured census records, even hired a private investigator, all to no avail. The thought of investing more money, more hope, only to face another crushing disappointment made her stomach clench. She closed her laptop, the sudden darkness amplifying the storm's fury. Yet, the article's promise lingered, a faint whisper in the howling wind. DNA. A tangible link, a biological echo resonating through time. Maybe, just maybe. The next morning, the rain had subsided, leaving a world washed clean and gleaming. Elara found herself back at the laptop, navigating the website, her fingers trembling slightly as she clicked the Order Now button. A week later, the kit arrived, a small, sterile box containing a tube and instructions. She stared at it, a strange mix of anticipation and dread churning within her. Swabbing the inside of her cheek felt oddly intimate, as if she were offering a piece of herself, a fragment of her history, to the unknown. She sealed the tube, her hand shaking now, not from fear, but from a fragile, flickering ember of hope. Carefully, meticulously, she packaged the sample, addressing the label in her neat, precise script. The post office was bustling, the air thick with the scent of paper and stale coffee. As she handed the package to the clerk, Elara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't certainty, not by any means. But it was a step, a chance, a glimmer in the long, dark night of her search. She watched as the package disappeared into the mail slot, a tiny vessel carrying her past towards an uncertain future. Walking home, the sun warmed her face. She imagined her brother, wherever he was, feeling a similar warmth, a shared connection across the miles, a silent promise whispered on the wind. It might be nothing, she reminded herself. But for the first time in a long time, Elara allowed herself to believe that it could be everything. The unexpected match. Elara's mouse pointer quivered over the refresh icon. Another Tuesday, another agonizing ritual. 6 months had elapsed since she submitted her DNA, and Tuesdays had morphed into pressure points, throbbing with anticipation just beneath her composure. Every click was an incantation, a silent supplication to the universe for a clue, any indication of Thomas's whereabouts. The familiar chime of an incoming email sliced through the silence. Genetic connections update. Her lungs constricted. It wasn't the usual automated digest. This felt different, charged. She clicked, her pulse a frantic drum solo against her sternum. The subject line mirrored the alert, close relative match identified. Color leached from Elara's face. Close relative. Not some distant connection, barely a thread in the vast tapestry of ancestry. This signified something substantial. Her fingers, suddenly clumsy, scrolled down the page. The website's bland, azure backdrop amplified the turmoil within. There it was, starkly presented. Name, George Miller. Estimated relationship, first cousin, second cousin. Confidence, high. George Miller? Elara blinked, her gaze sweeping over the name again, as if sheer force of will could conjure recognition. George Miller. The appellation resonated with utter, painful unfamiliarity. Thomas's family history was a patchwork of Willowbrooks, a scattering of Davidsons courtesy of her grandmother, and faint echoes of Austrians from generations past. But Millers? The name was an anomaly. She reread the message, hunting for a disclaimer, a footnote explaining the potential for inaccuracies, the likelihood of misinterpretations. Nothing. Only the blunt, unwavering assertion, George Miller was probably a first or second cousin. Her thoughts spiraled, clinging to improbable scenarios. Could he be a previously unknown half-sibling of Thomas's father from before his marriage? But even then, the name felt discordant. Foreign. No. It had to be an error. A digital hiccup. A cruel jest played by fate. Elara snapped her laptop shut, the sharp sound ricocheted through the quiet apartment. She rose abruptly, her leg catching on a stack of painstakingly organized files. They tumbled to the floor in disarray, scattering images and documents, pictures of baby Thomas, documents from the adoption agency, yellowed newspaper articles chronicling lost children. She crumpled to her knees, the accumulated weight of half a century pressing down. The ordered system of her search, normally a source of solace, now felt like a mocking monument to her lack of success. George Miller. Just another cul-de-sac. Another phantom sensation offering false promise. She reached for a time-worn photograph of Thomas, his cheerful, gapped smile captured forever. It's a mistake, Tommy, she rasped, her voice thick with suppressed grief. It has to be. But even as she spoke the words aloud, a minute seed of uncertainty sprouted in the fertile soil of her weariness. What if it wasn't an error? What if this George Miller held a fragment of the enigma she had been wrestling with for so long? What if this unexpected connection was the key to finally finding her brother? A niece's persuasion. The scent of lavender hung heavy in the air, a constant companion in Elara's meticulously organized living room. Sarah perched on the edge of the floral armchair, its chintz fabric a stark contrast to her ripped jeans and tech company t-shirt. She took another sip of the lukewarm tea Elara had offered, its chamomile scent doing little to soothe the knot of worry tightening in her chest. Her aunt looked utterly defeated, slumped on the sofa, the ancestry.com results page glowing accusingly from the laptop screen. Aunt Elara, Sarah began gently, you've been at this for as long as I can remember. Don't let one roadblock stop you. Elara sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured balloon. But what if it is a dead end, Sarah? What if he doesn't want to be found? Sarah reached out, taking Elara's hand. It felt fragile, papery. Maybe he doesn't know he's being looked for. Or maybe he changed his name. Elara frowned, her brow furrowing. Changed his name? Why would he do that? All sorts of reasons, Sarah said, shrugging. Witness protection, a fresh start, maybe he just didn't like George. People do it all the time, especially back then. It wouldn't necessarily show up in the usual databases. She pointed at the screen. This just matches DNA. It doesn't account for aliases, adoptions, or closed records. Elara stared at the screen, her eyes tracing the blurry image of the match's profile. A younger man, not George. Not the brother she remembered. But the connection was undeniable. The DNA didn't lie. I don't even know where to begin, Elara whispered, her voice thick with despair. Sarah squeezed her hand. Let me help. I'm pretty good at digging through the internet. Give me the information you have on this George Miller. Anything. Old addresses, family stories, anything at all. I can cross-reference it, try to find connections, look for name changes, anything that might lead us somewhere. Elara's gaze flickered with a spark of hope, a tiny ember in the ashes of disappointment. She sat up straighter, her shoulders lifting slightly. You do that for me? Of course, Sarah said, grinning. Besides, you've been telling me stories about Uncle George my whole life. I'm invested now. Consider me your research assistant. She winked. And I'm much better at this stuff than you are. No offense. Elara chuckled, a watery, fragile sound. None taken. I am, after all, still trying to figure out how to program the television. She reached for a worn leather-bound scrapbook on the coffee table. All right, Agent Miller. Let's get to work. The scrapbook felt heavy in her lap, filled with faded photographs and newspaper clippings, fragments of a life she desperately wanted to piece back together. The hunt was back on. Across the street. The rhythmic clicking of the keyboard filled the otherwise quiet kitchen. Sarah hunched over her laptop, brow furrowed in concentration. Elara sat at the table, nervously pleating and unpleating the edge of a faded napkin. Almost there, Sarah muttered, navigating through a maze of online databases. There are a lot of George Millers in the greater metropolitan area, but here we go. George Michael Miller. Possible relatives, listed parents, matches your information. Age, consistent. Let me see. She clicked on a map icon. A satellite image shimmered onto the screen, resolving into a familiar street. Elara leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Okay, Sarah said slowly, zooming in. This is Maple Street. Number 14, Maple Street. She glanced up at Elara, her expression carefully neutral. Ready for the kicker. Elara swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Just tell me. Sarah hesitated, then blurted out, he lives across the street, Elara. Number 14 Maple. That's right across from your house. The silence that followed was deafening. Elara stared at Sarah, her face draining of color. Across the street, she whispered, the words barely audible. All this time, he was right there. Sarah reached out and took Elara's hand. I know. It's a lot to process. Suddenly, a burst of laughter and the sizzle of grilling meat drifted through the open window. Elara flinched, her eyes widening. What's that? She asked, her voice trembling. Sarah listened for a moment, then frowned. Sounds like Eat the Barbecue. Probably coming from number 14. She got up and peeked through the curtains. Yep. Definitely a party. Kids playing, people eating, looks like a family get-together. Elara sank back in her chair, her hands shaking. A family, he has a family. And they're right there. I can hear them. The reality of it crashed down on her, a tidal wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. 50 years of searching, of imagining, of dreaming, and now he was just a few feet away, living a life she knew nothing about. I can't, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I can't do this, Sarah. It's too much. Sarah knelt beside her, her voice soft and reassuring. You don't have to do anything right now, Aunt Elara. Just breathe. We can take this one step at a time. We can watch from the window. Or we can just leave it for today. It's okay. Elara closed her eyes. The sounds of the barbecue, the happy shouts, the clinking glasses, the music, a painful symphony just beyond her grasp. The smell of charcoal and grilled onions wafted in, a sensory reminder of everything she had missed, everything she might still have. The scent was bittersweet, evoking memories of childhood summers, of family gatherings long past. A lump formed in her throat, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. The weight of 50 years settled upon her shoulders, heavier than ever before. The barbecue. The aged photograph, slick with nervous sweat, clung to Elara's palm. A gaped grin beamed up at her, Leo at 6, mischief etched into every line of his young face. She squeezed it tight, the cardboard's rigid edges biting into her skin. Beside her, Sarah offered a quiet presence, a solid counterweight against the rising tide of anxiety as they crossed the asphalt. A pulsing bassline throbbed in the air, a counterpoint to the tempting aroma of sizzling meat. From afar, the BBQ's festive decorations had seemed almost inviting. Now, confronting the reality, Elara felt a cold dread coil in her gut. Red, white, and blue balloons danced on the breeze, tethered to the mailbox of the house mirroring her own. Patriotic streamers crisscrossed the porch, a flamboyant display. Unrestrained laughter echoed around them, a vibrant chorus both alluring and off-putting. Just a quick peek, Sarah murmured, her touch a featherlight reassurance on Elara's arm. See if we can spot him. They lingered by a beat-up sedan, feigning fascination with its peeling layers of paint. The yard teemed with activity, children darting between legs, adults forming conversational clusters around laden plates. Elara's gaze swept across the crowd, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. She noted a woman sporting vibrant pink hair, a man sporting a waxed handlebar mustache, a teenager lost in the digital world of his phone. No George. He's probably holed up inside, Elara breathed, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe he shies away from crowds. Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp and observant, taking in every detail of the scene. Or perhaps he's running late. Let's inch a little closer. Each step felt like slogging through thick mud. The savory scent intensified, threatening to overwhelm her. Snippets of conversations drifted to her ears, baseball scores, summer plans, tales of a new puppy. A parallel existence unfolding across the street, utterly unaware of the void in her own. As the edge of the lawn drew nearer, Elara's breaths grew short and shallow. The photograph felt like a leaden weight in her hand. She envisioned the confrontation, approaching a man who could be her brother, presenting him with a faded image. Recognition? A flicker of familiarity? Or simply a blank, uncomprehending stare? Vertigo threatened to pull her under. She seized Sarah's arm, her knuckles bone white. I can't, she gasped, her voice lost in the music's swell. I just can't. A familiar twinkle. The air, thick with the mingled aromas of charcoal smoke and sweet honeysuckle, pressed down like a velvet curtain. Sarah gave Elara's fingers a comforting squeeze. Ready. Elara could only manage a tight nod, her throat suddenly constricted. The man at the grill, spatula in hand, straightened. As he pivoted, Elara's breath caught, not from his weathered face, etched with the history of years, but from a profound and unsettling sense of recognition. Afternoon, he greeted them, his voice a warm, resonant bass, his smile carving gentle lines around his kind eyes. And then she saw it, a subtle spark, a pinpoint of light dancing in his right eye, a mischievous glimmer that spoke of shared secrets. A trick of the light, perhaps, yet it unlocked a floodgate. A buried memory, dormant for decades, surged to the surface, a summer afternoon, a pilfered treat. Little Leo, caught in the act, his expression a mask of feigned innocence, that identical captivating spark shining in his eyes. The patio swam before her. A metallic clang echoed as the spatula slipped from nerveless fingers and hit the flagstones. George! Sarah exclaimed, her voice sharp with concern as she retrieved the utensil. This is my aunt, Elara. Elara, this is George Miller. George offered a hand, a puzzled crease forming on his brow. A pleasure, Elara. Are you feeling quite well? You've lost your color. Ignoring his offered greeting, Elara plunged into the depths of her capacious tote, sending a cascade of small items tumbling onto the nearby lawn chair. "Just a moment," she murmured, her hands clumsy as she finally unearthed the well-worn wallet. She flipped it open, her fingers struggling with the stubborn plastic until she could extract the fragile photograph. A faded image of two children, their faces alight with conspiratorial joy, met her gaze. Leo, a tangle of limbs and perpetually disheveled dark hair. And herself, a scrawny child with pigtails, her small hand firmly clasped in his. She extended the picture, her tremor so pronounced that Sarah had to support her wrist. Does this mean anything to you?" George accepted the fragile relic, his features softening as he examined it carefully. He squinted against the sun, rotating it slightly. A soft chuckle escaped his lips, a deep, vibrating sound that resonated through Elara. "Well, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "That's little Leo, plain as day, with his sister." He lifted his gaze to meet Elara's, the glint in his eye no longer a fleeting spark, but a steady, warm glow. "You look familiar, miss." "Remarkably familiar." "Home at last." "George?" Elara breathed, her voice a fragile rustle. Before her stood a man sculpted by time and trial, a tentative smile gracing his lips. A slow nod confirmed the impossible. "It's a long tale, Elara. I was just a boy. I strayed too far from the park and lost my way. They found me, but couldn't locate my family. I was adopted, given a new name, George Humphrey." Sarah, who'd been hovering nearby, gasped softly. "Adopted? All these years?" Elara felt a dizzying sway, reaching for Sarah to steady herself. The revelation struck her with the force of a rogue wave, answering decades of unanswered questions, fruitless inquiries. Not abandonment, but a cruel twist of fate, a childhood ripped away and adrift. I nursed a dim memory of a sister, a park, a yellow balloon," George confided, his voice thick with unshed tears. "But the images blurred, like wisps of a dream." He rubbed his neck, an unconscious habit Elara recognized instantly from their childhood escapades in the Willowbrook garden. She moved closer, scrutinizing his face. The years seemed to recede, the wrinkles softening, revealing the mischievous boy she'd lost, brimming with boundless energy. Wordlessly, she enveloped him in an embrace. The floodgates opened. Tears streamed freely, a torrent of joy, relief, and 50 years of suppressed sorrow finally released. George held her tight, his own eyes mirroring her emotion. He felt profoundly familiar, like a vital piece of her soul clicking back into place. The scent of his worn leather jacket, the comforting pressure of his arms, it was all achingly, wonderfully tangible. "Welcome home, George," she managed, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Welcome home, brother." The embrace deepened, a silent dialogue spanning half a century. Sarah, fighting back her own tears, discreetly withdrew to the edge of the lawn. The savory fragrance of barbecue still hung in the air, a reminder of the gathering now utterly transformed. A different kind of warmth began radiating through the neighborhood. Gradually, neighbors began to coalesce around Elara and George, their curiosity blooming into understanding as Sarah filled in the incredible details. A wave of hushed astonishment rolled through the onlookers, quickly giving way to a spontaneous cheer that erupted from the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, the baker, scurried home and returned bearing a freshly baked apple pie, its aroma a comforting balm. Mr. Abernathy, the retired carpenter, clapped George heartily on the back, his weathered face alight with genuine joy. Offers of hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt welcomes flowed freely. The family barbecue had morphed into a joyous homecoming. Children darted about, their carefree laughter filling the approaching dusk. Adults shared stories, their voices touched with awe and happiness. Elara and George stood shoulder to shoulder, bathed in the golden light of reunion, their faces glowing with pure, unadulterated joy. The yellow balloon she'd purchased earlier, now seemingly forgotten, danced gently against a nearby oak, a silent beacon of hope and a symbol of dreams restored. Home, at long last, had found them.